From February 9, 2012, the following is VoterRadio.com's coverage of a discussion on government corruption and reform featuring former lobbyist Jack Abramoff. Abramoff is the author of Capital Punishment, The Hard Truth About Washington Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyist. The event was presented by the North Carolina Center for Voter Education and held at William Peace University in downtown Raleigh. Speaking first is Dr. Damon McLennan, a political science professor at Peace University.
I'd like to introduce Mr. Damon Circosta, who will introduce tonight's speaker and will moderate the discussion after Mr. Abramoff speaks. Damon is the executive director of the North Carolina Center for Voter Education, a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that tirelessly strives to make sure that we have an open political process in North Carolina. Now, I've known Damon for many years, and I want to tell you that you are very lucky to be citizens of North Carolina and have Damon in the position he's in. Damon's talents and tirelessness in working to make sure that you have objective information about the political process and a strong advocate for an open, clean process is worth having. So, welcome Damon Circosta as he introduces Mr. Jack Abramoff.
I want to thank everybody coming out this evening. Again, my name is Damon Circosta. I'm with the North Carolina Center for Voter Education, and we're pleased to be here because I think we've got a really interesting opportunity for some insight. Arguably one of the most famous lobbyists and former Washington power players, Jack Abramoff, his life has been a roller coaster story. Time magazine referred to him as the man who bought Washington. He rose to become one of the nation's most successful and prominent lobbyists before becoming enmeshed in the most harrowing political scandal since Watergate. Having served 43 months in federal prison, Mr. Abramoff is out and speaking. He's on a speaking tour, and that's what brings us here this evening. He once labeled the dysfunctional and Byzantine system, which has become our federal government, as the favor factory. No one, I think, can tell us better why that favor factory needs to be shuttered and how we can go about doing it than Mr. Abramoff. Here's what we're going to do this evening. We're going to start with Mr. Abramoff giving a few remarks. We're going to engage in a moderated discussion here on stage. But the bulk of the evening, I want to be reserved for us to have a discussion. Everybody in this room, I think, cares deeply about our political system. Otherwise, you wouldn't be out with us here on a Thursday evening. And I think that's how we can best use our time. So what we've done is we've set up a microphone here, and we'll hopefully have a good, earnest dialogue about how best we can move forward. The Center for Voter Education now has been around for 12 years, and what we work is on process. We really think that the only way to get to fair and equitable outcomes in a society is to really focus on the process, and I hope we can do that here this evening. So, without further ado, Mr. Jack Abramoff. Jack?
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Can you hear me okay? Yes, okay. Appreciate that introduction, especially as somebody who's unfortunately became used to the introduction of "Will the defendant please rise?" It's nice to hear that. I actually was last in Raleigh over 25 years ago, and so it's a delight to come back. Since in those 25 years, I've been on I guess a different journey, a journey that, as Damon mentioned, I guess seemed like a roller coaster at times. Times it seemed like the roller coaster never went up, but only kind of down. And I was last here during the political campaign in 1984, where I was a surrogate debater on behalf of one of the candidates. And I was also the chairman of the College Republican National Committee at that point, and the candidate I was a surrogate debater for was Ronald Reagan. Now, from that position, which is what got me into politics, college Republicans, when I went to Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts, not exactly a hotbed of Republicans, by the way. In fact, when I went to Brandeis, when I showed up, they put me in the former dorm room of Angela Davis, who, if you remember, was a perennial vice presidential candidate for the Communist Party, USA. And I don't know if they were doing that as kind of a joke or what, but I wound up in her room. I don't know how much of it rubbed off on me, but I wound up at Brandeis and joining the political organization of the Republican Party. I was a Republican, and got active and became eventually the national chairman of the College Republicans. which is what brought me here. And from there, became a lobbyist at first, back when I was a young man, 24, 25 years old. I headed President Reagan's grassroots lobby on Capitol Hill. And it gave me my first taste of the lobbying business. And I liked it so much that I got out of there in about a year and fled to Hollywood, where I made very forgettable action movies. Well, I'm trying to forget them. I'm sure you never saw them or had anything to do with them. But for about 10 years, until the Republicans took the Congress in 1994, which is the first time in my lifetime that they ascended to control of both houses on Capitol Hill. And so one fateful weekend day after that election, my across the street neighbor, who was the managing partner of a law firm called Preston & Gates, where Bill Gates' father was the senior partner, said to me, you know, all of your right-wing kook friends have taken over the Congress. I said, oh, well, yes, I know. And he said, but we don't have any of you folks in our lobbying firm. Would you like to be a lobbyist? I said, a lobbyist? Gosh, that's horrible. Why would I want to be a lobbyist? Aren't they the folks ruining the country, like most people frankly think? And he said, no, we're all we do is keep the government off of Microsoft's back. And if you remember, in those days, Microsoft was really the central core of the tech world. It was before Google and what's it called, Facebook and everything. So I went and visited them, and being a free marketeer, I wanted to keep the government off the backs of Microsoft. And so I said, okay, I'll join. And I became a lobbyist. And I, over a period of 10 years, figured out the lobbying business, so unfortunately for me, a little too well, and built what wound up being a pretty large lobbying practice, and slowly but surely slipped into a quagmire, personally and systemically, that is part of the problem in this country, part of the big problem in this country. And as I piled success on success in that area, and I built this big practice, and I had clients who had billions of dollars at stake, and my team who worked for me ultimately grew to the size of 40 lobbyists, and we had tremendous success. In fact, we never lost except one time. And in the course of doing that, in the course of wanting to win, in the course of pushing the envelopes, I pushed over lines in the sand that I stopped caring about because I wanted to win. And ultimately, I allowed the ends to justify the means. And I prided myself in the fact that we helped clients who I felt were good people do things that I agreed with, saving them billions of dollars, making for me and my firm tens of millions of dollars. And my wife and I wound up giving about 80% of the money we made to charity and communal causes. So I thought I was doing great. I thought I was absolutely phenomenal, doing a great job for clients, doing good things with the money, helping lots of people with the money I earned. And then one day, a scandal started. And it started for a variety of reasons. An article appeared in the Washington Post and accusing me of charging a lot of money to my clients. Well, I did charge a lot of money to my clients. So the irony is my firm and I had an email discussion when the article came out saying, well, should we post it on our website? After all, we have other articles that look like that from the New York Times and Wall Street Journal. And, I said, okay. And they said, well, we don't know the picture's not so good. And, that was the discussion. Well, a day later, Senator McCain subpoenaed all my emails and started a process that ultimately led me into an abyss. And I, unfortunately, was a prolific writer in those days of emails, having written 850,000 emails during the course of those less than 10 years that I was a lobbyist. And my law firms somehow saw fit to save every one of those emails. And I'm sure I'm the only one in the room who's written stupid emails, but I wrote plenty of them, all right? And I wrote boneheaded things that I ultimately got to read on the front page of the Washington Post. In fact, I became the poster child for that old adage, don't write anything in your email that you don't want to read on the front page of the Washington Post. Well, I read plenty of what I wrote on the front page of the Washington Post, much to my great chagrin. Well, the thing started, and I thought, well, it's Washington, it's America. There's no attention span in this country. Everybody's ADD. this will be over in about 2 weeks. Well, it got worse in 2 weeks. It didn't get better, and worse and worse and worse. And so I shifted into, well, why are they picking on me? I don't understand this. So I'm a lobbyist. This is what we do. This is our business. What's going on here? And I had that attitude for a little while until I said, I better get a lawyer because this is getting very serious. And I got a lawyer, a criminal lawyer, and we started going through my emails. And I started looking back at what I was, what I did, and I started thinking, gosh, did I write that? Did I do that? Was that me? Did I really do that? Why did I do that? And that was a process of months and months. And over those months, I started thinking honestly about myself. And I started looking at myself honestly in a way that, frankly, you don't want to do. And in the honest assessment of myself, I thought, gosh, I don't like what I'm looking at here. This isn't what I set out to do. This isn't what I set out to be. This isn't what, frankly, I thought I was doing. The irony is I thought I was a moral lobbyist. I thought I was a good lobbyist. Why? Because my clients always won. And if they didn't win, I'd give them their money back. To me, that was the metric of morality. There wasn't a consideration, how does this affect the country? How does this affect the land that I love? How does this affect the system, the moral system that I believe in? There was a total divorce of reality from thought. There was a dissonance there that was very troubling to me. Well, the process continued. Unfortunately, it got worse and worse for me. I told my lawyers, look, I obviously have done things that were wrong. So I want to go to the Justice Department and I want to cooperate. I don't want to fight. I don't want to create a big spectacle here. And truth is, in America, when they come for you anyway, that's pretty much it. 90+% go to prison or find themselves as felons. And I figured, look, I'm not going to successfully defend things that I don't believe. I believe I was bad. I would believe I did things that I shouldn't have. So we went and I started to work with them. I started to meet with the folks at Justice and at the FBI and explain these 850,000 emails, and these poor folks had to read these things. You can imagine how happy they were with me. Probably would want to pull their guns out at some point and blow my head off. They had to read so much stuff. And eventually, at the end of it, I was put in prison. And as I landed in prison, that was the final fall for me, the final thud. And I was in a federal prison for 43 months, which is a long time. Frankly, I hope nobody in this room has been to prison for a day. It's horrible. But I was there for 1,299 days, and that was pretty horrible too. And while there, before I got there, I should say, I had already come to the conclusion that I regretted where I was. I regretted what I did. I felt terribly mortified about what I'd done, what I'd been involved with, and also what the system had evolved to. Whereas I was 100% guilty myself, the system I ultimately came to believe was also 100% guilty. But I got to prison and I figured, all right, I'll serve my time in prison. And when I arrived in prison, by the way, I didn't know how long I'd be there. I wasn't sentenced yet. And my case was complex, and so I had enough to get me into prison, but for 22 months I was in prison, not knowing how long I'd be in prison. And only 22 months later did I wind up getting a sentence. So while I'm there, I started to think about the system. And I said, I could leave here and just go home to my kids and to my wife and try to repair my life and repair their lives and just kind of hold each other close as we have through the whole process. And frankly, bury my head in the sand and hope people quickly forget my name, which unfortunately wasn't Smith. So whenever we show up at a store, it's like, aren't you the guy who, like that? And maybe just disappear. And as I would walk the track, they have a little walking gravel track where I was, I started thinking, I know things. I've been in rooms that I wish I wasn't in. I've been behind doors I wish I wasn't behind. But the truth is, this is a bad system. This is a system that needs some fixing, and I see how they manipulate it when the fix comes and is in. And maybe I can help a little bit, not to repair my name, that's never going to happen, but at least to make some recompense. For goodness sakes, I took advantage of it. So maybe I have something to add. And I thought, I at least will tell what goes on. And where the chips fall, they may. And as I continued my sentence, I thought, more than that, I actually could probably help figure out what to do about this, because as a lobbyist, whenever I saw reform coming, I used to laugh like every other lobbyist because we knew the reform was a joke. But what if the reform wasn't a joke? What if the reform was really a threat to that old world? So I put on my old lobbyist hat and I walked the track, and I thought, what are the things I would have done to stop? What are the things I would have stopped if I was a lobbyist? What would I have put down what I was doing and gone to the Congress and said, don't support this? And I wrote them up, and I made a list of them. And then from that list, and I put it in my book, from that list I chose things that I thought the right and the left could agree about, because I'm on the right, but a lot of the people who work on this issue are on the left. And we all know that if the right and the left don't support something in this country, it ain't going to happen, because the Congress is divided probably permanently for a long time in a way, and structurally set up in a way, that if you don't get both sides agreeing, you're going to get very little to go through. So I found a few things I thought that folks could agree on. I wrote my book. I got out. I wrote my book. I waited till I could, be done with the shackle on my leg, what's called a GPS monitor they put on you. And when that was done, I started to talk. I started to talk to groups. Eventually, my book came out in November. And since then, I've been doing a lot of media about this issue and traveling and speaking with a dedication that, frankly, I want to do something about it. It's not the kind of thing that's going to help me repair myself financially. And by the way, I have a massive restitution order ahead of it anyway. It's not the kind of thing that's going to restore me to the world I was in. Nothing would do that. And frankly, I would turn it down anyway. But it's the kind of thing that for me is important, because finally I got, after a club to the head and having to lay on the floor for a while, I got what is intuitive probably to most of you sitting here listening to me tonight who didn't need that over your head to figure it out. But the mission for me then became, how do I take what I know and how do I transform it into something that could help? And that is what I'm trying to do. So just in brief, that's, I guess, an opening comment of what I'm doing and where I'm trying to go. And I guess we're going to have
Jack, if you want to come on over here. Can you guys hear me okay? Great. Jack, you want to come over here? We'll continue the conversation if that's okay with you. Thanks for the opening remarks. And I want to spend most of our time today talking about process issues in these very reforms. But count me as one of those people who saw you on TV and said, man, I hope he goes to jail for a whole long time. I believe in the system, and I think, by golly, he's screwed it over. In your book, you mentioned the first time. It was a congressman in Texas. Texas, is that right? Mm-hmm. And in Texas, you were trying to do something for the missile defense system, and the only way you could get it through was by putting a military base in this congressman's district. And you got it done, and you got home, and you said, wait a second. So I want you to go back to that moment, and I want you to explain to us, did you think, well, maybe it's time to back away from this? Give us your thought process as you went through that sort of first conversation.
Can you hear me? I'm not audible? Okay. I'm a little probably more soft-spoken than my reputation is, so let me... I was on the Piers Morgan, I guess is his name. He's a host on CNN, and I don't speak. This is the way I speak. This is the way I've always spoken. And I was sitting and talking to him, and one of the commercial breaks, he leans over, he goes, I don't want to see that version of you. I want to see the horrible version of you, the mean one, the loud one. I said, this is all you got. I don't have that version available. My kids may have seen that version, but, I think what Damon's talking about is when I became head of President Reagan's lobby back in, grassroots lobby back in '85, the MX missile, if you all remember that program. And by the way, am I audible now? Everybody? Okay. All right. The MX missile was up for a vote, and we were lobbying there was a Reagan administration initiative to pass, to fund the MX missile. So I was the lead of our group, and I was head of it, leading to lobby in the House. And we were 6 votes short. yeah, I think it was 6 votes short. And I got a call from a congressman from Corpus Christi, Texas, named Bustamante. And he was Democrat. And we didn't lobby the Democrats. Our organization organized the Republicans. We were sort of a whip organization for the Republicans. So he called me and he said, Mr. Abramoff, which I was only 25. I wasn't used to being called Mr. Abramoff unless I was in trouble by principals and things. And he said, would you come down to my office? I want to talk to you about the MX missile. Okay. I got in a taxi, went down to his office, and he shut the door and he said, okay, my view is you're 7 votes short. I think we thought we were 6, but okay. He said, I've got 13 votes in our caucus, and you can have those votes, but I need something. So I said, okay, what do you need? Do you need me to, do your grocery shopping? I mean, I was naive. I don't know what he's talking about. What do you need? He said, well, I need a naval base. I said, well, I don't have any naval bases. He said, no, I need the naval base that's going to go to, I guess, Pensacola or something like that. I need that in Corpus Christi. We need those jobs. So I was young, naive, and I said, okay, what am I supposed to do? He says, well, call the White House and see if they'll give me the naval base. And they will, you'll get the votes. So I picked up the phone, and I used to liaise with the then Director of Communications in the White House, who was a man by the name of Pat Buchanan, in his pre-running for president days, I guess. And I called Pat, and I said, Pat, I'm in an office, in the anteroom of an office of congressman, and he told me blah, blah, blah. He said, hold on, puts me on hold. I'm thinking they're going to get on the phone and say, tell him to go jump in the Gulf. What are you talking about? And he doesn't get back on. Another staffer gets back on and says, okay, he's got the naval base. Tell him he's got the base. We want the votes. So I hung the phone up. I said, you have the base, and we'll get the votes. And we got the votes, and we won. And as I left, as Damon said, I kind of thought, that didn't seem right. That seems pretty bad. And it troubled me. And I went back, and I didn't last much longer in the job, and I went off to go make movies. And I kind of put it out of my head. It certainly made me feel uncomfortable, but I put it out of my head. And when I eventually came back politically, it wasn't something sitting in the front of my mind. Frankly, it didn't come back into my mind until I was done.
Well, I don't know technically how this is going to work, and maybe we might need to do a separate mic up here, but we'll see how this works and we'll go from there. But the question is, so 10 years later, you come back, it's out of your head. Was there ever a point, and I really do want to move to process right after this, but was there ever a point before the hammer came down, if you will, where you thought, I need to walk away? Or did it just not happen until the hammer came down?
No. As I said earlier, I didn't think I was doing something wrong. Unfortunately, there's a concept that, frankly, is Hannah Arendt applied to a far greater evil, the Holocaust, which is called the banality of evil, okay? Which is when in your milieu, there's a certain behavior going on, it starts to seem normal to you. And unfortunately, and again, I don't want to mitigate in any way my wrongdoing. I don't. I admit my wrongdoing. I'm ashamed of my wrongdoing. I wish to God I could unring the bell. I can't, okay? But that doesn't mean that there wasn't a sense up there, and there isn't a sense up there, by the way. I'm gone. Do you think corruption's gone with me? When they locked the door in the jail on me, it's not like everything became pure. So there is a sense that, unfortunately, these are commonplace things. And so it didn't at all occur to me until I'm ashamed. I wish I could sit here and say to you, oh yes, I figured it out while I'm doing it and I stopped it. I didn't. I'd feel much better if I could. I'd be a hero if I could. I'm not a hero. I'm a villain in this. And unfortunately, I'm trying to now make recognition.
Well, and let's move to that conversation about process reform. You talked about several different ones. We've had some experience here in North Carolina with some of the proposals you've made in your book. And there's some other ones I'd like to chat about as well. Let's start with lobbying reform. Mm-hmm. One of the proposals in your book is a flat-out forever ban if you serve in Congress is serving as a lobbyist. Right. Tell us about that, and then tell us about some of these other lobbying proposals you have.
Well, I think people have to remember, people have to know, rather, that most lobbyists running around Capitol Hill and Washington, D.C., most of them come from public service. I was actually one of the only people in any of my lobbying chops,
and ultimately I guess I had a 40-person team working for me. I was one of the only people, in fact, I can't think as we're talking of anyone else who never worked for the government. Everybody up there comes from Capitol Hill, comes from the administration. Why? Because they have contacts. Because lobbying is, in its components, divided between access, influence, and capacity to persuade. And so access is a sine qua non. If you can't get into the people you need to convince, then you're not going to convince them. You're not going to be able to succeed. So we hired people from Capitol Hill. Now the problem is, with me in particular, and I write about this in the book, I noticed as I started building my team that the offering of a job was a way of control. Now, I guess I should have known this, as you probably all know it intuitively, that when you offer somebody a job, especially in that world, you basically own them at that point. Even if they say no, they're so complimented that you wanted to hire them that you're basically very close to them at that point. Now, most of them don't say no. 90% probably the folks that I work with up on Capitol Hill wanted nothing but to become a lobbyist. Why? They're making at best $100,000, a little bit more. Starting in the lobbying firm with me, they'd be making $300,000. And they'd quickly move up to, some of them moved up to near $1 million a year. And in other places, they become fabulously wealthy. So if you're sitting there in government service, and you enter government service to do good, and by the way, most of them do. Most people show up in Washington wanting to do good. They want to reform the system. They want to be okay. But the system ultimately gets to them. And they're human beings, and they see around them, they're living frugally, and lobbyists are living lavishly, and they want to make that trip. And so that once I made an offer to somebody, look, when you want to leave your job here in a couple of years, I'd love for you to come to work for me at the lobbying firm. Once they said, oh, yeah, I'd like to do that. At that point, almost every action of that staffer wasn't any longer on behalf of the congressman. It was on behalf of my law firm. And it wasn't even something I had to ask them to do. They were naturally feather bedding their future opportunity. So I have proposed in my book, again, as I looked at that world, that door, that revolving door, that cashing in has got to stop, that it's got to be shuttered. And not shuttered for 1 or 2 years like they have now, because that's a joke. Here's what happens. People, a senator will come off Capitol Hill, and they have a 2-year ban on lobbying. So they don't lobby. Instead, what they do is they pick up the phone, and they dial up Senator Bill. Hi, Senator Bill, this is Senator Sam. Hey, Sam, how are you? Good. I'm a member of this lobbying firm now. Wow, that's super. But I can't lobby you. Well, we know that. But I have a partner here named Joe. He'd love to come meet you and talk to you about a very important issue. Would that be okay? And Joe goes in, and the senator does his bidding. Now, that's all legal. That's all fine. But that happens because they can join the influence industry. The other part of it is that members of Congress never become lobbyists. There's some people even running for president who are history professors who don't become lobbyists, all right? But the truth is they're lobbyists. They're lobbying. Now, I just wrote a column about this, actually, and my column was entitled, Was I Ever a Lobbyist? All right? Now, I obviously am known as a lobbyist, but the definition of lobbying is such that I actually wasn't a lobbyist. In fact, nobody is a lobbyist, all right? And that's done purposely, and that needs to be tightened up. And once it is, I think that the revolving door has got to shut.
So lobbying obviously is where the influence happens on a day-to-day level, but in order to sustain the system, elections happen, and a lot of campaign finance is wrapped up into this. We're in a very unique time with campaign finance. Citizens United has happened. The term super PAC is known by just about everybody in the country. From a campaign finance perspective, putting back your old lobbyist hat on, how would you play that game back then, and then how would you shutter it now?
Well, I every year raised millions of dollars from my clients and gave them over as political contributions. And they were a vital part of the access that I had and maintained and the influence that I had. And you hear from every member of Congress and the Senate saying nobody's buying my vote for a $2,000 contribution. Yeah, and they're right. Nobody's probably selling their vote. But what they are not saying is that it is a system, a process, an ongoing process. So if I'm raising $100,000 for a congressman and I'm coming in there to ask him, would he support me on an issue, and assuming it's not something he's not diametrically opposed to, if he can find a way to do it, he's going to do it for me. His own constituent could somehow, maybe, luckily by mistake, wind up in his office, okay? Somehow snuck in there and asked him for something, and he's not going to do it. And there's something very wrong with that. We have a very unlevel playing field, and it's because of not only the relationships, but the money that lobbyists and their clients are able to put into the system.
So obviously some sort of lobbyist ban, we have one here in North Carolina where lobbyists can't give is a start. Let's go deeper a little bit. How else? I mean, the money can still be out there, and like you said with the Senator Sam and the sort of Senator Joe's friend, do we need another system? Do we need another source of funds? Is there another way we can go?
Well, my own belief is this, and I speak in front of a lot of diverse groups, and including a lot of groups on the left who are very much in favor of public financing of campaigns. And I point out to them that, first of all, it's a non-starter because the Republicans are not going to support it. So it's a non-issue. But number two, let's say it was okay. I said, look, I have to explain to you how lobbyists think and how special interests think. When you see money, when a lobbyist sees money, it's something to go get. It doesn't matter whose money it is or what money it is. I mean, I could easily see lobbyists running people for office all over the country to grab that money, all right? Anytime the government expends money, and this is something I try to explain to people who are in favor of an expanded federal government with an expanded mandate, that they have to understand what comes with it. What comes with it is thousands more lobbyists, thousands more special interests, because people go for the gold. Now, personally, if I could wave a magic wand, what I would do, and it's complicated, by the way, there is no easy answer to this. All right, we live in a very complex society, and it's a very difficult question, this. But what I would try to do is remove the money from the system that is bribery. And what I mean by that, and it is not polite, and it is something that I've been castigated about relentlessly for the past few months, is that anytime a public official is given a financial gratuity, whether we call it dinner, golf, tickets to the ball game, and by the way, I bought more tickets to the ball game than anybody. I spent $1.5 million a year on it when I was a lobbyist, all right? And these were Washington, D.C. teams, too, that we had to force people to go watch. Redskins, right? They haven't been to the playoff, I think, since who knows when. So tickets to the ball game, meals, contributions, any conveyance of a financial gift, whatever you call it, to a public official that you're getting something from is a bribe. If you're in court and you go up to the judge and go, hey, judge, here's some tickets to the Wizards game. You know, enjoy yourself. That's a bribe. Everybody gets that. But unfortunately in Washington, if I were to walk in, or similarly to, you were the congressman, Damon, and I'd say, oh, hey, Damon, here's a sack of $100 bills, 100 Ben Franklins. Here you go, buddy. Tomorrow, there's a vote. I'd like you to vote with me, okay? We all get that's a bribe. If I walk into you and say, Congressman, how are you? I just held a good fundraiser for you. Here's 10 $1,000 checks of people contributing to your campaign. They love you. They think you're a fine public servant. Oh, by the way, you know, I talked to your staff. Tomorrow there's a very important vote. I'd love you to take a look at it. We don't consider that in Washington. That's not a bribe. There is no difference, folks. There is no difference. Now, you're laughing because you think that's absurd. But I'm telling you, that is not considered a bribe there. That is considered normal business. So I believe that those who are lobbyists and their clients and anyone who's getting something back special from the federal government, it's a grant, it's a loan, it's whatever it is, okay, a contract, they should not be able to give a dollar to a public official in any form. It's bribery, it's got to go. Now, if that, and by the way, that's going to mean an awful lot of folks who are involved in corporations, a lot of folks who are involved in labor unions, a lot of labor union entities, a lot of corporate entities. All of these groups, in my view, are bribing Congress to give them more things. Now, somebody who's getting Social Security, okay, is not bribing Congress. That's a general benefit. But somebody who's getting a personal tax break, that would be a bribe. So I believe that the only moral system that will survive a challenge, a constitutional challenge, and possibly is possible politically, not easy, I'm not saying it's easy, would be something like that.
Well, none of these political solutions are easy, and as you say, anything's going to need sort of a left-right coalition to happen.
Right.
I want to ask you one more question. I want to open up to the folks here in the audience, but I noticed you proposed getting rid of I believe it's the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators.
Yeah.
And for the life of me, I don't understand how that's going to work. Let's say it could happen politically. Doesn't that just force corruption down on the states? Then doesn't all of a sudden it become a state-level corruption issue as opposed to a federal corruption issue?
Well, there is corruption in the states,
Sure.
number one.
You're in North Carolina. You don't have to know these.
Well, I'm sure there's no corruption here. No, I was actually just in Kentucky. I just spoke to the legislature in Kentucky. Now, Kentucky in 93, I think it was 92 or 93, had a horrible scandal. They had like an abscan thing where the FBI guys came in, gave out envelopes of cash and things like that. And I think about 20 people went to prison. Now, what they did in Kentucky after that was they created an ethics regime for their legislature, which was unheard of. They made very strict rules, and what they mandated was that every year the legislature was required to attend ethics sessions. And they brought me in for one of these. So it was actually, they were compelled to be in the room, okay? And they actually went out and got them. And I haven't been in a room where everybody was compelled to be there since prison. So I didn't, I didn't remember anything like this. And at first, they were kind of wondering, what in the world am I doing there? What's a felon doing standing in front of us? Talk about ethics. This felon in particular, this villain. And I started talking to them. And at the end of it, I explained some things to them about how lobbyists think and how, in fact, while they have a great system, they need to ratchet it up. It's going to be that the American people, not just on the state level, but on the local level, on the city level, at every level, we see all over the country, city governments. Look at Bell in California. Corruption, unfortunately, is everywhere. Folks, we're human beings, all right? Unfortunately, human beings are aggressive. Human beings at times are corrupt. And where there's power concentrated in the hands of people, other people want that power and that money. And it's going to require vigilance. Now, in the 17th Amendment, my point on the 17th Amendment was twofold. Number one, these Senate races are turning into 8-figure contests. They're no longer $1 million you get a Senate seat. I don't know if you're following what's going on in Massachusetts, but this is a mid to high 8-figure race. So where is that money coming from? Where can that money come from? Unless somebody is Bill Gates, someone is going to have to raise that money. And these races have become targets and magnets for people like I was to come in with big money. And so if the senators are instead elected as they originally were intended to be by their state legislators, you are removing a massive federal corruption problem. You are creating other issues, but I think that they can be dealt with. It's a longer discussion, probably not something you're for tonight.
Well, let's open this up to the audience. I'm going to have you stay here. I'm going to head up to that podium. And if folks would like to come to the microphones here, we've got one here and one here. I think that might be the best way to handle it. It's not that big of a room. We might be able to hear you. So how about you back there? Can you either just stand up or, yeah. If we can get you to a microphone, that might help. Sure.
So you could put an independent wall there. Of course, you have to monitor it, right? But you could settle it, or it could be government monitor, or it could be quasi-government monitor, where you can contribute, but they can't know who you are.
Did they get the money that you contribute to them? If they get the money, guess what's going to happen? At a cocktail party, somebody's going to go, tell your boss I put in $10,000. Don't worry, you'll get it in the next few weeks. And by the way, your lobbyists are some lobbyists are so dastardly that they'll say, tell your boss I put in $10,000. They ain't put a nickel in, all right? And they're going to play off that. You know, right. Look, by the way, I do want to say, and this is very important, I'm not against lobbying. Lobbying, and no one should be against lobbying. It's a right in our Constitution to petition our government. It is something that most lobbyists do fine. The 30,000 lobbyists aren't running around. They aren't a bunch of me's running around, okay? But there are too many who act in that way. But most lobbyists there are trying to do their job and do it well. The problem for those lobbyists, though, is when they run up against somebody like me, they're going to lose every time because they don't play with the same weapons. The battlefield is not equal. So that's a good idea in theory, but you got to remember who this audience is. You know, it's not the College of Cardinals. It's the, you know.
How about you, sir? Question?
Certainly appreciate your conversation and looking forward to reading your book. What you are talking about tonight is really an effort to change the ethics and morality of a political system that has become so polarized that we can't even talk to each other about legitimate issues. How would you suggest that at the grassroots level that we could go about trying to make a difference? And I'm for making a difference, I promise you.
Well, I think a couple things. First, in terms of making a difference as regards these issues, my hope is that the various groups that focus on these things are going to come together, come to a point where the left and the right can agree on certain provisions, draft it up, and then go out to members of Congress and candidates for Congress and get them to sign on the dotted line that they will sponsor a bill within 30 days, vote it out of committee, et cetera, and cut off every procedural out along the way until legislation can be approved. And if they don't sign or they violate that commitment, that people get organized and go after them and defeat them in their districts. I wouldn't want to be a congressman, frankly, if my opponent has signed on to it's called a pledge, that says, I am going to vote for legislation that means I'm not going to take bribes, I'm not going to cash in on my public service, I'm not going to hang around here for the rest of my life, and I'm not going to make laws that apply to you all, but not to me. If somebody won't sign something like that and commit to that, and their opponent does, I wouldn't want to be that person running if the opponent knows what they're doing.
How about you over here?
First of all, I think it takes a tremendous amount of hubris and courage. I'm from New York, so I'll say chutzpah, to come up and seek redemption through reform. So whatever your opinion is of what Mr. Abramoff did, I think we should all give him a round of applause for trying to change the system. Really. And I think that's an example for all of our leaders, even ones that have had their privates exposed and denied that to their dying day, that you've come forth, unlike Mr. Wiener and so many others. Anyway, my question pertains to how your former colleagues view you now, basically, you know, calling them naked, and also how senators like McCain and so forth that have benefited from your largesse or peripherally feel about you now and regard what you're doing.
Thanks. Well, my former lobbyist friends, I won't be winning Man of the Year at the American League of Lobbyists this year, I've been told. They're pretty unhappy with, before my book came out, copies started leaking out to the press, and they started attacking me and denying that any of this exists and that this is a fantasy of mine, that none of this happened. I was thinking, great, none of it happened. Can somebody please give me back 43 months of my life? All right, it happened. And so they're unhappy that somebody has broken omerta, that somebody who knows and was where I am, or where I was rather, has sort of switched teams. They don't understand it. Some of my friends are saying, you know, why are you doing this? Look, I was offered, even when I was in prison, I was offered to get back in the lobbying business. I'll tell you, while I was being investigated, While I was sitting in the room with them, some of my former clients wanted to rehire me and conveyed that to the authorities. Before he's in prison, could he help us with this thing? All right? Now, it was a source of great humor for me and for the Justice Department folks. We thought it was kind of weird and funny. Since then, I was offered a chance. As I say, people came to visit me in prison. Could you please come out and help restructure our lobbying firm, et cetera. But instead, I came out. They didn't know what I was thinking, and they didn't know where I was. My head had already turned. And when I did come out, I was subjected to a torrent, and I'm constantly subjected to a torrent of opprobrium. The usual response is, don't listen to him, he's a criminal. Don't listen to him, he's a felon. Don't listen to him, he got convicted. Well, I pled. I guess technically I got convicted. And my response is, what the heck does that have to do with what I'm saying? All I'm doing is telling you what I did, what I was involved in, what goes on, and what I think you can do to fix it. I could be a Martian as far as you're concerned, and it shouldn't matter. People also ask me a lot on the radio, how do we believe you're sincere? I said, the truth is, I don't know how you believe I'm sincere. I'm not running for president. I'm not running for office. I'm not trying to become popular. That's never going to happen, folks. All right? I'm never going to have a day where they throw a parade for me. I've already accepted that. The question is not what's in my heart, but what am I doing? What am I saying? What am I speaking about? If you can argue with it and you can really honestly say, gee, you're wrong. Everything's fine over there. And by the way, a lot of them do. Then okay, ignore me. But we all know that's not the case. So I haven't been well received by them. However, I should say this. A number of congressmen have called me quietly, and they're a little timid and a little afraid to make this too well known. Obviously, to call Jack Abramoff, and you're a congressman, unless your name is Dana Rohrabacher, the only congressman who basically proudly stood up and said, I don't care what you say, and visit me in prison, things like that. Most of them fled like, mice running off the ship. But they call and they say, listen, what you're saying is right. We got to fix this system. We can't do it from inside. You guys have got to do it from outside. So keep going, keep speaking, don't let them get you down. And I say, look, I was in federal prison for 43 months. Do you think some lobbyists are going to get me down? Do you think I'm intimidated by a lobbyist? I was in a prison. Hello? So anyway, it's I'm going to keep going. As long as I'm useful in this, as long as I can add something and help people get to a good goal, I'm going to be there to do it. I'm not going to lead it. I'm not the person who's going to go up and lobby on Capitol Hill for this. But everything I know, everything that's in my brain, I want to use to help get it done.
Are those calls from both sides of the aisle?
No, they're Republicans. They're people who were my friends. I had Democrat friends, but they didn't stay in touch. But a few Republicans did.
We'll go here, and then I think you're going to be our last question. So we've got 3 more questions for you.
Hi. First of all, thank you for being here. I actually work for the government and have no intentions of becoming a lobbyist. And this may be a hard question or an easy question, but that day that you were on the front page or wound up in the Washington Post, if that day had not happened, would you still be doing what you were doing?
I'd love to tell you that I wouldn't be, but I'm going to be honest with you. I would absolutely have still been in there. Unfortunately, I didn't see the problem until I got beaten in the head. And I don't want to, I wish that I had it in me. And maybe over time it would have, but I have to just look at what reality is. I would have been there. I would have still been at probably the top of the profession, making millions of dollars every year. And I would have thought everything was just fine if this didn't happen. Unfortunately, I wish I could say different.
You mentioned in your opening comments that you felt what you were doing was moral and that you thought the correct moral rubric was to simply return the money of your clients if you didn't win for them. With hindsight being what it is, what would you consider to be the appropriate moral rubric for a lobbyist today?
To not use money and resources to influence public servants, but instead to gain access to those honest and decent, and many of them are, by the way, members who will give you access and try to make the arguments for your clients. That is the moral position. But here's the bad news. You're going to lose. You're going to lose to somebody like me. Because somebody like me is going to be sitting in their office while they come out into the anteroom to meet you and shake your hand and listen to what you say. And then when they're done, they're going to go back in their office and laugh about it with somebody like me. And until the system is changed and the playing field is leveled, the decent and good lobbyists, when coming up against the powerful lobbyists, are going to lose. And that's the problem. And that's why we've got to get this fixed.
How might a multi-party system and term limits help mitigate the corruption?
Could you repeat that?
Yes, how might a multi-party system and term limits mitigate the scandals and the violations?
Well, term limits would be very important. I mean, term limits, and by the way, as a lobbyist, I was against term limits for obvious reasons. Once, as I've said before, once you buy a congressman, you don't want to have to go buy it again. You want that person to stay there until, as usual, the undertaker takes them out. So term limits, I think, is important because it's rare, if not impossible, to find a member who doesn't, over time, descend into some form of the corruption. Okay? Even if they're convincing themselves that they're okay and they're not doing anything wrong, in essence, they're taking money from lobbyists, they're being involved with special interests, they're putting through programs that are spending money in ways that are probably inappropriate. They're all doing that. So a term limit where it's limited, you go and serve and you go home and someone else comes. You know, there are plenty of very bright Americans, okay, who could come do this job. There's only 535 of them. You could change them every hour and not run out of good people in America. So certainly letting somebody stay there 50 years is probably something we got to rethink. In terms of multi-party system, meaning having another party besides, at least one other party besides Republicans and Democrats, well, that might be good, but I don't think that's ever going to happen in this country, because the people have to remember how unbelievably entrenched the parties are and how difficult it is for a third party to have any impact. Even a meaningful third party candidacy, where the third party, let's say, is running for president and garners a lot of votes. And let's say they are so successful that they throw the election into the House of Representatives. Well, guess what happens then? The majority party, or whoever, they count it differently than a pure majority, but whoever has the most votes and ain't going to be the third party is going to be president. That's the best and most successful scenario. The media, the networks, the parties, the money, the structures of our country are geared to two parties right now. Breaking out of that is going to be exceedingly difficult. And what it's going to take is a multi-billionaire to throw several billion, or a series of them, into reforming the structure. I had hoped, frankly, while I sat in prison, I thought about this as well, because it is a problem that there's two parties only. And I kind of watched a lot of the dot-com stuff. I was in prison, you know, when I went to prison, they didn't have any of these things like Twitter and Facebook and Google and, you know, YouTube and all that stuff. Or at least I didn't know about it. And I watched it and I read about it while I was in prison. I thought, gosh, why didn't one of these guys step forward? You know, because they think out of the box, they're disruptive in their thinking. And why don't they step in here into this space and try to do something? And ultimately, they do step in, but they step in a way to protect their companies. They step in the same way that Microsoft stepped in, and Google now does, and others. They basically are part of the system. They're not separate from it. Well, I thought I went through it a little bit earlier, but let me try to give a little bit more. You know, when you fall down onto the floor and you're laying in a puddle of your own blood, all right, and everything you thought was your life is presented in a way that maybe wasn't your life, it starts you thinking. And now a lot of people stay in denial, and a lot of people get through that and say, well, you know, screw the you-know-whats. They're all wrong, I'm all right. And I was in prison with a lot of people like that. They were never wrong. And they were, you know, the system got them, and their lawyers got them, and the judge got them, and the prosecutors and the FBI, and it's just they hate. And I just decided to take a different route. I said, you know what, maybe I wasn't right. Maybe smart old me was dumb. And instead of being so smart, maybe I was really dumb. And that's how I started looking at myself. Maybe everything I thought about what I did was wrong. And I started reading my emails. And over the process, it wasn't overnight. It took months and months and months before I finally came here. I didn't, I'm talking about it tonight like I flipped the light switch on. It wasn't that. I was in denial at the beginning. I was part of the, why are they picking on me? Why is this happening to me? Why, this isn't fair. I went through all those stages. But at least, thank God, I came through the other stages. Because I could have easily been in prison, angry. I was one of the only people in prison. And it's not a good thing, by the way, in prison to be like this. I thought my prosecutors and the FBI people were honest and professional and decent people. Now, they put me in prison for a long time. I'm not inviting them over to a party at my house, okay? And they separated me from my family, and it was incredibly painful what we went through. But they were honest and decent and professional, and they weren't abusive, all right? And they socked me with a lot of time, but I at least could approach it like that. I said that when I got to prison, I was of that view. And I said that a couple times there, and you can imagine the looks I got, all right, from folks. And I stopped saying it, but I wrote it in my book, and I believe it. So for me, the process was a long one, but it was one where I finally decided to be honest with myself, about myself, and that was what was required.
It's been quite an evening, and I think it's something that really is my privilege at the Center for Voter Education to be involved in a dialogue like this. And I'd like to give Mr. Abramoff and everybody here in this room a big round of applause. Thank you very much. A couple of things I'd like to mention before we all head on out of here. First and foremost, Mr. Abramoff's going to be autographing any books. There are books for sale up front. If you guys would like to do an autograph line, it'll start here on stage. The Center for Voter Education puts on events like this from time to time, and we'd love to have you all join us again. There's some cards out there. If you want to leave your name and email address, we won't shop it around or send it anywhere else, but we'll certainly keep you updated. And also, if you want to share this event with your friends, you can go to voterradio.com, and it'll be available online later this evening. So with that, I say thank you all for coming out. I hope it was as good for you as it was for us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
From February 9th, 2012, this has been VoterRadio.com's coverage of a discussion on government corruption and reform featuring former lobbyist Jack Abramoff. The event was presented by the North Carolina Center for Voter Education and held at William Peace University in downtown Raleigh.